Imagine that you were a little boy with only one dream: to reach Formula One. You don't do it for fame or money. You do it because you love racing. So you start like everyone else in go-karts. But you're not alone. Among the millions of kids you compete with, there's one with whom you develop a special bond, a friendship, a brotherhood. And years later, you both make it. You reach Formula One. And not only that, but you become teammates in the most dominant team on the grid. Those two kids who once shared hotel rooms when they raced karts now share a garage and fight for glory. But suddenly everything falls apart because when a world title is on the line, there's no room for friends, only for enemies who know each other all too well. What started as a rivalry between brothers ended up becoming an all-out war, one that divided the team, broke the trust, and turned friendship and respect into contempt and hatred, into one of the most ruthless rivalries Formula One has ever seen. A war so intense that it ended with one of them retiring from the sport because he simply couldn't stand the other. But that wasn't the only one. There was another so extreme that while one risked his life trying to beat his rival, he ended up trapped between fire and metal, fighting to survive, to the consequences of that obsession. And meanwhile, the other kept racing, winning, smiling for the cameras, surrounded by parties and women. But there was also one that was the most tragic. One in which two teammates were united by the same team and the same flag, until a betrayal changed everything. One lost his life trying to get revenge, and the other did too, not long after. Because when a rivalry breaks loyalty, the ending is already written. In Formula One, there are rivalries that not only decide championships, but also break friendships, put drivers' lives at risk, and sometimes even take them away. Today, we'll look at the 10 most intense, personal, and destructive rivalries in the history of the category. In this video, you have the second part of this ranking that I made together with my friend Arturo. If you want to see the top 5 spots, you can find them on his channel in the paddock. You have the link in the description and in the pinned comment. And now get ready, because you're about to discover how far a man can go to achieve glory when it is worth more than life itself. Niki Lauda and James Hunt took their personal war to such an extreme that one of them almost died trying to beat the other. Long before they fought in the top category, they met in European Formula 3. Two supposed opposite personalities who, even so, respected each other and even got along well. Lauda was methodical, disciplined, and gave precise feedback to the engineers. Hunt, on the other hand, was raw talent, improvisation, and had no schedule. Despite that, there was genuine admiration. Lauda celebrated when Hunt won that extremely close Formula 3 title. They were friends until their desire to reach ultimate glory put them face to face. 1974 and 1975 were the prelude to the year in which they would take their rivalry to the maximum. Lauda signed with Ferrari and through hard work transformed the team and achieved the results that both he and the team longed for. And what began in 1974 was accomplished the following year in 1975. The Italian team put an unbeatable car on the track. Lauda was crowned champion with authority and made it clear that he would be the man to beat in 1976. Hunt, on his side, kept growing and gaining momentum. The talent was there. All that was missing was the structure to support him. And then came 1976. With the unexpected departure of Emerson Fittipaldi from McLaren, Hunt landed in Woking and the story changed completely. Lauda at Ferrari and Hunt at McLaren. Now both had the necessary tools to fight for the title. The season opened with the Austrian being relentless, racking up points again and again. Meanwhile, Hunt alternated between great displays of speed and penalties and controversies. The contrast could even be seen in the paddock. Lauda talked with his engineers, described the car's behavior down to the last detail, and fine-tuned the settings lap after lap. Hunt, on the other hand, didn't have his rival's technical knowledge. He was much less methodical and drove based on his instincts. In addition, there was his laid-back personality off the track, with scandals involving substances and women. Those differences, which seemed like details, became the heart of the rivalry. And then, the first big bombshell dropped at Jarama. Hunt won on the track, but his McLaren didn't meet the measurements and he was disqualified. So the victory ended up in Lauda's hands. However, McLaren protested. The battles off the track began, and the tension started to rise. In Zolder, things went the same way. Hunt retired due to gearbox issues while Lauda won and extended his lead. In Monaco, the Austrian dominated again, and Hunt, once more, was out. In Sweden, the Ferrari driver finished third, the McLaren driver fifth, and the situation for the Englishman was looking worse and worse, until finally things started to change. In France, Lauda retired due to an engine problem and Hunt won. And then Brands Hatch arrived. Hunt had an accident, so the red flag came out. The chaos on the track was absolute. The Englishman returned to the pits using a service road, so the stewards said he was not on the track at the time of the neutralization and could not take part in the restart. However, the pressure from the local crowd was unbearable and the stewards gave in. They let him start and he ended up taking the victory. Tyrrell and Ferrari appealed and the case dragged on for months. The fight was no longer just on the track, but also in the offices. And what started as a battle between Lauda and Hunt was now also between Ferrari and McLaren. And then the monster appeared. Nürburgring Nordschleife, the Green Hell, a circuit with walls close by and dangerous, unpredictable weather. More than 20 kilometers of what could be considered a death trap. Before the race, Lauda asked to boycott it, since he considered racing there too dangerous. There was a vote, but the final decision was that the race would go ahead despite the rain and the extreme conditions. During the Grand Prix, the Austrian's Ferrari crashed, bounced, and was engulfed in flames. But not only that, it was then hit by two other cars. Several drivers stopped to help. However, the damage was already done. Lauda inhaled toxic smoke, suffered severe burns, and was left on the brink of death. Anyone else would have disappeared for months, but Lauda didn't. Just 6 weeks after nearly losing his life, with his wounds still open, he returned at Monza in Ferrari's home. He finished fifth and ended up fourth. In that way, the season that seemed over came back to life. However, the situation was not the same as before the accident in Germany. While Lauda was fighting to recover, Hunt racked up victories and closed the gap considerably. Meanwhile, the teams kept fighting off the track. Reinstatement of controversial results. The boycott in Germany, Hunt's subsequent disqualification at Brands Hatch. Each decision shifted the standings, and so the title went to Fuji to decide the Formula One champion of 1976. On race day, Japan was under a downpour and everything was set for the final battle of the year between the Austrian and the Englishman. Hunt started second on the grid and Lauda third. But after just 2 laps, in conditions where visibility was zero, Lauda made a decision that changed history forever. He got out of the car. He chose to live. He said his life mattered more than the championship. It was the most human, yet also the year's most controversial decision. Meanwhile, Hunt continued, and the title seemed to slip away from him. He suffered a puncture and had to stop in the pits. However, when he got back on track, he achieved the impossible. He climbed back up to the 3rd place he needed, and he was crowned world champion by just 1 point. The final result was not just a podium, nor a trophy. It was a line that divided 2 ways of understanding the sport. After the incredible battle they had, their paths went in different directions. Hunt faded quickly, and after continuing with excesses, and almost ruining his life, he found his voice as a commentator. But a few years later, his lifestyle took its toll, and he died very young. He was only 45 years old. Lauda, on the other hand, became champion again in 1977 and 1984, and he continued to make history in Formula One. From the pit lane with 2 of the sport's most dominant eras, first with Schumacher at Ferrari, and then with Hamilton at Mercedes. 2 men, 2 opposites, and a rivalry that will be remembered as one of the most entertaining, hard-fought, and tragic in the history of the category. And although Lauda was able to save his life after the accident he had during the battle against his rival, one of the drivers in the next position was not so lucky. From now on, I will narrate the positions alternately with Arturo from In the Paddock. So I'll leave you with him, so he can tell you about the rivalry that ended in the most tragic way ever seen in Formula One.
Some rivalries are defined by titles, stats, and on-track battles, but none compare to the one between Gilles Villeneuve and Didier Pironi. A story so intense that it left scars impossible to erase. It could have been number 1 in this ranking. It had all the ingredients: betrayal, internal war at Ferrari, And an ending so brutal that it's still talked about 40 years later. Why is it in 4th place and not higher? Simple, because there were no winners here. Everyone, absolutely everyone, ended up losing. The 1982 season was already chaos in itself. The cars were faster than ever, the turbos exploded, horsepower. But safety was stuck in the 70s. At that time, every weekend was an impossible balance between glory and disaster. In that scenario, Ferrari arrived with a missile under their arm, the unstoppable 126 C2 single-seater, and with a pair of drivers who promised to dominate. On one side, Gilles Villeneuve, the idol and favorite gladiator of the Tifosi, and on the other, Didier Pironi, the calculating Frenchman whom Enzo Ferrari had signed as a complement. The Commendatore's plan was simple. Villeneuve as the undisputed leader and Pironi as his wingman. Nothing could go wrong, but as you know, Formula One never follows easy scripts. Villeneuve was already a living legend. A wild driver, capable of both the sublime and the absurd in the same lap, for many the fastest man ever to sit in a race car. Pironi, on the other hand, was the opposite. Cerebral, technical, known for being cold and also methodical. Ultimately, two opposite poles in the same garage. The start of the season was a nightmare for Ferrari. Retirements, spins, and penalties. They arrived at Imola with barely a point from 3 races. But the Grand Prix at Ferrari's home was going to mark the beginning of the Civil War. Only 14 cars started the race due to a political boycott, and everything was reduced to a Ferrari exhibition. With 15 laps to go, Villeneuve was leading and Pironi was in 2nd place. The team showed the slow order on the pit boards. That translates to stop taking risks, let's hold positions, and secure the 1-2. Gilles understood the message and eased off. Didier, however, saw slow as do whatever you want, just don't crash. So he overtook. First once, then again, until on the last lap he launched a ruthless attack at Tamburello, overtaking Villeneuve on the outside, who was already celebrating his victory on the inside. Pironi crossed the finish line first. For Gilles, what happened felt like a stab in the back. He had obeyed the team, he had trusted his teammate, and instead he received the most humiliating betrayal possible in front of the Tifosi. On the podium, he struggled to keep his composure, and in the garage he made it clear, this is war. From now on, I'm on my own. Pironi defended himself boldly. He said that there was never an order to hold positions, that slow only meant to be careful, a cheap excuse that nobody bought. Villeneuve, outraged, swore he would never speak to him again, and he kept his word. With that poison in his blood, the championship arrived at the Belgian Grand Prix. Pironi set the provisional pole. Villeneuve tried again and again, desperate to beat his teammates' time. It wasn't just a fight for pole position, it was a matter of pride, of revenge, of proving who was in charge at Ferrari. Gilles, completely obsessed and stubborn, went out on track to make one last attempt with destroyed tires. He wanted to beat Pironi at any cost, and in that pursuit, he crossed the invisible line between brilliance and disaster. On his final attempt, the car flew, and the story of Gilles Villeneuve faded away forever. Ferrari withdrew their cars from that race. Pironi did not show up at the start. The Maranello garage became a mausoleum of silence, and what had started as a rivalry of egos ended up becoming an indelible wound. They say Pironi changed after that. He went from being a charming guy to an arrogant man, obsessed and with a dangerous self-confidence. His mechanics recall he seemed like a different person. Perhaps he was. He bore the ghost of Imola on his shoulders. The betrayal that had broken his teammate, that ghost haunted him all the way to the German Grand Prix. There he suffered a terrible accident that shattered his legs and forced him to leave Formula One forever. The irony was cruel. The man who had taken victory from Villeneuve was also out, mutilated by his own ambition. The outcome of this rivalry is chilling. Villeneuve lost his life in his crusade to avenge the betrayal at Imola. Pironi lost his career and his reputation, condemned by the Tifosi as the Judas of Ferrari. And the team ended 1982 as one of the darkest seasons in its history, marked by tragedy and also by frustration. So why are Villeneuve and Pironi in 5th place and not higher? Even though it was one of the most dramatic rivalries ever, there was no sporting conclusion or justice on the track. It wasn't resolved with a title won or lost, but with a void that no one could fill. It was so intense that it ended abruptly, and the only thing it left behind was pain. That's the reason why it doesn't top the ranking, even though it had all the ingredients to do so. The legacy, however, survived. Jacques Villeneuve, son of Gilles, closed the circle in 1997 by becoming world champion. And on the French side, the Pironi surname returned to the paddock decades later with Gilles Pironi, son of Didier, who worked as an engineer for Mercedes. Two families united by a rivalry that destroyed everything. And yet, over time, it became part of the DNA of Formula One. The rivalry between Villeneuve and Pironi is a brutal reminder. When betrayal enters the garage, the price to pay can be extremely high. It was a war in which no one won. A battle that left no champions, only ruins. And the cruelest thing in Formula One is not losing a title, it's losing everything.
In 2007, Fernando Alonso arrived at McLaren as a two-time world champion. He was the man of the moment, the driver who had dethroned Schumacher, the one who had the world at his feet. The British team welcomed him as the big star he was. He had the speed, the experience, and the support to lead the team to success. But alongside him came a rookie, Lewis Hamilton, young, fast, aggressive, but above all British. And he wasn't just any rookie, he was the protege of Ron Dennis, team principal and a father figure in his career since childhood. Hamilton was not just a future project. For many within McLaren, he was the world champion they themselves had developed. And from the very first race, it was clear he wasn't going to be a wingman for the Spaniard. In Australia, Hamilton had a better start than Alonso and overtook him at the first corner. And finally, he finished on the podium in what was his debut. Fernando finished second, but he could only beat him because of strategy. In Malaysia, Alonso responded with an outside move in turn 1 to make it clear it wasn't going to be easy. With every race, the tension grew. Both knew that the other wasn't going to give up an inch. Then, when they got to Monaco, McLaren had a dominant car. Alonso was first and Hamilton was second. From the pit wall, they ordered them to hold positions to secure the team's result. Alonso logically obeyed, but Hamilton didn't accept it. He finished the race upset, and he publicly criticized the team, saying they hadn't let him fight for the win. Instead of calming things down, Ron Dennis declared, "Today I set aside my emotions as a father." For Alonso, favoritism was no longer a suspicion. It was a confirmation. And it wasn't just any favoritism. It was the team boss prioritizing his lifelong protege over the two-time world champion he had brought in to win the championship. Then came the hardest blow. In Canada, Hamilton got his first pole position, and also his first victory. In Indianapolis, he did it again, 2 races in a row, and suddenly, the rookie was leading the world championship. Alonso couldn't believe it. He had come to be number 1, to fight with Raikkonen and Massa, not for his own team to treat him as equal to a rookie. So the relationship started to break from within. Every detail was scrutinized closely. Every team order created suspicion, and the tension could no longer be hidden. And so the breaking point came where everything exploded. Hungary. During qualifying, the two battled for pole position, and the exit order for the final attempt became a radio topic. Hamilton disobeyed a team order to let Alonso pass on the final run. Fernando was supposed to have priority on track, but Hamilton ignored it. In response, Alonso stayed stopped in the pits for several extra seconds during his last stop, knowing that this would prevent Hamilton from doing another lap. He left him trapped with the red light. Hamilton couldn't get out in time, and he didn't get to start his final lap. Alonso, on the other hand, got the pole. McLaren, and especially Ron Dennis, were furious. Also, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile intervened immediately. They penalized Alonso with 5 places on the grid, and McLaren, instead of protecting him, left him alone. From that moment on, Alonso was completely isolated within the team, and Ron Dennis broke off all direct contact with him. And as if that wasn't enough for the Spaniard, the next day, Hamilton won the race. From then on, the war was no longer just between drivers. It was a total fracture. Alonso was left without support within the team. In fact, some even celebrated Hamilton's victories with more enthusiasm. And while all this was happening, the two kept fighting for the championship. In Italy, Alonso won. In Japan, under torrential rain, he retired due to an accident. Meanwhile, Hamilton finished second and extended his lead. But in China, one of the most unusual scenes in McLaren's history took place. Hamilton was comfortably leading, but they left him out on the track too long with destroyed tires. And when he finally tried to enter the pits, he couldn't turn. He went off, he got stuck in the gravel, and his race came to an end. That's how they reached the last race where everything would be decided, in Brazil. Hamilton, Alonso, and Raikkonen arrived with a chance at the title. McLaren, with 2 cars against 1, had everything in their favor. But even so, they couldn't do it, because Hamilton wasn't going to help Alonso, and Alonso wasn't going to help Hamilton. Neither of them helped each other. They neutralized each other, and that left the way clear for Ferrari. Raikkonen won the race and the championship by just 1 point. Alonso and Hamilton tied in points, and McLaren lost everything. The driver's title, the constructor's title, and even their dignity. Because besides the sporting failure, they were carrying the biggest scandal in decades. The case of espionage against Ferrari. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile found McLaren had confidential Italian team documents, leading to a $100 million fine and their exclusion from the Constructors' Championship. It was the biggest punishment in the history of Formula One. But there was something else. Part of that sanction was caused by internal emails that Alonso handed over to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. Some say it was an attempt to protect himself. Others saw it as revenge. The truth is that without those emails, the espionage might never have been proven, and McLaren was never the same again. At the end of the year, Alonso left after just one season with the team, while Hamilton stayed and won the driver's title in 2008. What started as a sporting rivalry ended up becoming an uncontrollable war, an internal battle that broke the team from within. Because in Formula One, sometimes your biggest enemy isn't in another team, but in your own garage. And although what Hamilton experienced with Alonso will forever be remembered as one of the greatest rivalries in this sport, it doesn't compare to what happened to the Brit a few years later with another of his teammates. This wasn't just a simple rivalry, it was an all-out war. A battle that divided teams, officials, nations, and ended up forever marking the history of Formula One.
Some rivalries start on the track, but Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg's began earlier, in their karting teens during a friendship that once seemed unbreakable, until Formula One turned it into an open war. They went from sleeping in the same hotels and joking like brothers to emotionally destroying each other, in wheel-to-wheel battles and without any mercy for each other. As we already know, the Mercedes team dominated most of the past decade with an iron fist. And during that time, two drivers who knew each other very well shared the garage. On one side, Nico Rosberg, by then already established as the leader of the team. This was after having beaten Michael Schumacher in 2010, 2011, and 2012. And on the other side, a Lewis Hamilton who had just arrived from McLaren, with the title of world champion and the aura of a superstar. As you can see, the bomb was set. The first spark flew in 2014. Mercedes had a rocket on wheels, and all that was left was to decide which of their two drivers would take the glory. The Bahrain Grand Prix was the first sign of what was to come. An epic battle between the two. Wheel to wheel, clean overtakes, but right on the limit. Hamilton won and fans applauded, expecting more battles ahead. They were right, but didn't realize the growing attention would strain the friendship over time. The breaking point came at the 2014 Monaco Grand Prix. Nico Rosberg took pole position, but controversy arose over how he got it. On his final attempt, he caused an unusual accident that triggered yellow flags and stopped Hamilton from finishing his last lap. Coincidence? Dirty trick? Officially, there was no penalty, but the doubt was planted in Lewis's mind, and the Brit would make it clear not long after. When the press asked him how his relationship with Nico was, Hamilton answered very clearly, "We're not friends anymore. Now we're just teammates." The friendship had ended in Monaco. The season went on, and the friction between them only kept increasing. That same year in Hungary, the team ordered Hamilton to let Rosberg pass, as he was on a different strategy. Lewis ignored the order and responded over the radio, "If he wants to pass me, let him try on the track." The message was clear. He wasn't going to give anything away. The tension grew and exploded in Belgium 2014. Nico, in an overly aggressive move, touched Hamilton and punctured his tire, ruining his race. Rosberg finished second, but he was booed on the podium. Mercedes scolded him in private, but the damage was already done. From then on, every Grand Prix was a psychological and political battle, as much as a sporting one. In the end, Hamilton won the 2014 championship after winning the last race in Abu Dhabi. Rosberg had mathematical chances in that contest, but a reliability failure left him with no options. The Briton was crowned champion, Mercedes secured its first hybrid-era title, but the garage's atmosphere was tense. In 2015, Rosberg started determined to get his revenge, but Hamilton was in top form. He won easily and was crowned champion several races before the end. Nico finished as runner-up, frustration boiling inside him. The peak of the rivalry that season was at the United States Grand Prix, where Lewis sealed the title and celebrated with a gesture that would be fuel for the fire. Lewis threw the second-place cap at Rosberg in the pre-podium room with absolute disdain. Nico threw it back, but that gesture, that thrown cap, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Rosberg swore that he would never be humiliated by the British driver again, and he kept his word. And that's how 2016 arrived, the all-or-nothing year. Rosberg started the season like an absolute steamroller, taking advantage of victories, capitalizing on Lewis's mistakes and mechanical failures. The desperation in the British driver was palpable, while Nico, for the first time, seemed untouchable. Their most iconic and memorable battle happened at that season's Spanish Grand Prix. Race start, turn 4, Hamilton tries to overtake Rosberg, they touch, and both Mercedes end up out. The team was furious. Toto Wolff threatened to impose team orders if they kept ruining results for the team. The Federación Internacional del Automóvil ruled the chaos as a racing incident, but the message was clear. Things had escalated into a civil war within Mercedes. And the tension, far from decreasing, escalated even more at the Austrian Grand Prix. In the final laps, both were fighting for the win, and once again, there was a crash. Rosberg ended up with a puncture. Hamilton won and waved ironically. The crowd booed him, but he said he didn't care. Toto Wolff was frustrated and the garage was chaotic. At one point in the season, Hamilton managed to come back from his initial disadvantage and even took the lead in the championship. Rosberg once again seemed doomed to a secondary role, but Formula One is cruel. In Malaysia 2016, Hamilton's engine exploded in flames while he was leading the race, and with that, all his chances vanished. Nico took a points lead that he would never let go of again. The final battle would come at the 2016 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Hamilton needed to win and for Rosberg to finish 4th or lower to take the title from him. The Brit did what he had to do by dominating the race. But in the final laps, he started to deliberately slow down the pace, hoping that Vettel and Verstappen would catch up to Rosberg and push him off the podium. The team ordered him to speed up over the radio, and Hamilton replied, "I'm fighting for the World Championship. Leave me alone." Rosberg felt the pressure, defended his position, and crossed the finish line in 2nd place. Finally, Nico Rosberg was Formula One World Champion. In the end, what came next surprised everyone. Just a few days later, Rosberg announced his retirement. He had reached the top, he had fulfilled his dream. But he didn't want another season of emotional strain against Hamilton. He left at the top, shutting the door on his rival and leaving him with a lasting sting by not giving him the chance for a rematch. That way, Hamilton would be furious, convinced that Nico had stolen his chance to settle the score in 2017. And that precisely is part of the magic of this rivalry. It ended at its peak, with no epilogues, no reconciliations on the track. Rosberg retired as champion and Hamilton had to swallow the defeat. Over the years, things calmed down. Rosberg admits that the friendship was never the same again, but he realized that Hamilton also made him a better driver. Lewis, for his part, ended up sharing moments with Nico's family, showing that time is capable of healing everything. The Hamilton-Rosberg rivalry was the great drama of modern Formula One. Broken friendship, betrayals, crashes, psychological wars, and an unexpected ending. So, why is it in 2nd place and not 1st? Because even though it was the most intense and publicized of the 2010s, it didn't reach the level of total destruction of the most historic rivalry in Formula One. But, without a doubt, it was the one that hooked the YouTube and social media generation of fans the most. Hamilton-Rosberg, a rivalry that started as a friendship and ended as a big scar.
It all started in 1988 when Senna signed with McLaren. Prost was already a 2-time world champion with a reputation built on intelligence and consistency. He controlled the environment. The engineers respected him. And Ron Dennis considered him the ideal driver. But Ayrton came in with another idea: to be number 1. Although there was mutual respect at first, the tension grew when Senna started to outperform him. That year, McLaren dominated. They won 15 out of 16 races. But the internal rivalry was fierce. Senna was more aggressive, faster in qualifying, and won 8 times compared to Prost's 7. And although the Frenchman scored more points overall, the drop score system worked against Senna, who took the title. But 1989 was the year when everything exploded. In Imola, they had an agreement. Whoever came out first at the start would not be attacked in the first corner. At the first start, Prost got away better, but there was a red flag. In the second, Senna overtook Prost and took the lead. He didn't respect the agreement. For him, the previous race no longer counted, while for Prost, it was a direct betrayal. The internal atmosphere became unbearable. Prost accused McLaren of favoring Senna. The garage was divided and the mechanics no longer shared data with each other. The Frenchman even suspected sabotage. Ayrton, for his part, felt that Prost was protected by the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, that he had the support of Balestre, the president of the federation, and that if he didn't beat him on the track, they would never let him win. Thus, the relationship was broken, and in Mexico, the tension exploded. Prost was behind Senna in the race and noticed that even though he was taking the same line and even exiting the corners better, Ayrton, with more worn tires, was pulling away on the straights. It was as if his Honda engine had more power. That was when he confirmed his suspicions that McLaren, but especially Honda, favored Senna. And that, for a driver as methodical and controlling as Prost, was unacceptable. From that point on, the relationship was not only broken with Senna, but also with the team. In the middle of 1989, Prost confirmed his signing with Ferrari for the following season. He announced it right before the Grand Prix at Monza, the home race for the Tifosi. After winning the race, he received the affection of the Italian crowd, and as a symbolic gesture, he gave his podium trophy to the Ferrari fans. From that moment, the break with McLaren was public and final. And then Suzuka came. Prost was leading the championship while Senna needed to win to stay alive. And on lap 46, while Ayrton was trying to overtake the Frenchman, he went all in at the chicane and they crashed. Prost was out. For his part, Senna kept going, went into the pits, changed his wing, got back on track, and won. But later, after a complaint from Prost, he was disqualified from the race. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile argued that he had cut the chicane to rejoin, that he hadn't completed the full race distance, and he was excluded. They took away his points, and with that, the championship. Prost was crowned, and Senna was devastated. He publicly accused Ballester of having manipulated the result, of acting with favoritism because he was Prost's compatriot, of having stolen the title from him. And although he was about to leave Formula One because of this situation, he came back the following year. And once again, in Suzuka, the championship was on the line. But now, the positions were reversed. And if Prost didn't win, Senna would be the champion. The Brazilian got pole position, but Ballester forced him to start from the dirty side of the track, being disadvantaged once again. As soon as the lights went out, Ayrton made it clear. He wasn't going to let them steal another championship from him. Prost had a better start, but Senna didn't brake and dove on the inside. They both crashed in the first corner and were out of the race. That day, Senna won the championship in the most controversial way ever seen. And although he initially denied that the crash was intentional, months later he admitted it. He said he wasn't going to keep allowing himself to be harmed from the outside, that if he didn't defend himself, no one would. And the following year, in 1991, Senna comfortably became a three-time champion. Meanwhile, Prost, with an uncompetitive car, started to get frustrated. And after several poor results, he criticized the car and was fired from Ferrari. Because of this, he took 1992 as a sabbatical year. However, he returned in 1993 with the best car, the Williams. But not only that, he included a clause in his contract. Senna could not be his teammate. That year, Prost won his fourth title and retired, but in the last race in Australia, Senna took the victory and did something unexpected. He hugged him on the podium. It was a gesture of respect, of closure. They weren't friends, they never were, but between the two of them, they built the most intense, most brutal, and most iconic rivalry of all time. A year later, Ayrton Senna passed away in Imola, and with his death, an era ended. But a legend was also born. This rivalry had two of the most controversial world championship deciders in history. However, there was another rivalry between teammates that was not only decided between them, but the same team did everything to benefit one and harm the other. The rivalry tells the story of the Argentine driver who suffered one of the biggest robberies in the history of Formula One. So watch this video if you want to know what happened between these two teammates who pushed tensions to the limit, as well as the other 4 spots in this ranking on the Enel Paddock channel.